Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me in the back? Yes? Doing good? Okay, great. Welcome to the 6th annual Marfa Agave Festival. My name is Caitlin Murray, and I'm one of the organizers. We want to thank you all for being here, thank all of our sponsors for their generosity, and in particular, Virginia Leberman and Vicente Celis for allowing us to be at the Capri in this beautiful space. We have a really packed program. As you guys have probably seen, there are programs up at the front that you can grab on paper, also online at marfaagavefestival.com. We also have t-shirts, posters, books available, and all of the sales of those items go to support the festival. So the focus of the first talk this afternoon is on the role that agaves play in bat survival and the significance of biodiversity. In many ways, I feel like this festival has a biodiverse orientation. It seeks to better understand and celebrate the diversity of life in this region. My conception of community and the community of Marfa for a long time had been very human-focused. But what this festival and many of its participants have helped me to better understand is that the Chihuahuan Desert is made up of plants, insects, bats, other mammals, and humans that came before us and the humans of the present. So we hope that what I've learned is that to address our community really means to recognize the variety and diversity of this place. With that being said, please join me in welcoming Fran Hutchins, Director of Bat Conservation International's Bracken Cave Preserve. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you for having us here, and this is a beautiful venue to have a nice outdoor talk about bats and wildlife. Before we get started, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of information about myself and Bat Conservation International, our organization, and the projects we have going on pretty much all over the world. 40 years ago when I was in college, I would not have thought that I would be having anything to do with bats. Bats were not on my radar, as they say. I actually wanted to be a park ranger, but when I saw how much money park rangers did not make, I was not going to be able to feed the wife and the baby and go to college at the same time. So I looked over. Business school was making more money, so I went and worked for the dark side for 25 years. I was actually in the car and truck rental business, which is an amazing business. You can make good money in it, which was nice. I was able to retire and get into what I really wanted to do: work outdoors, work with wildlife conservation, and work with people. And so 17 years ago, was actually 20 years ago, my hobby was caving. So I loved crawling around in holes in the ground and looking for them and finding them. And also started doing some volunteer work in San Antonio, Austin area, and was able to hook up with Bat Conservation International and turn the hobby into a job. So for the last 16 years, I've had an amazing job working with bats. My office is Bracken Cave Preserve in San Antonio. Have anyone been to Bracken Cave? Oh, thank you. Good. So some of you are getting out enough. So the rest of you, if you're in San Antonio, Texas during the summer months, Bracken Cave is the home to the largest colony of bats in the world. How many of you have seen a bat flight somewhere? Good. So Carlsbad, maybe Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, most of the two popular ones. Carlsbad is only a few 100,000. If you've been to Austin, that's 1 million bats, largest urban colony. But at Bracken, we have 20 million bats that live in this cave from March until November. And when they come out, we call it a batnado. And for 3.5 hours every evening, that's how long it takes them to empty the cave. And it's a maternity colony. So we actually are having babies as we speak in the cave. And so those millions of bats will be foraging for food every night throughout the summer. So that's the backdrop for my office. So I just can't beat it. We have 3,500 acres surrounding the cave. 1,500 of those acres are owned by Bat Conservation International, and to protect this amazing roost. Bat Conservation International has been around for 40 years. Actually, 2022 is our 40th anniversary. We got started in Austin, Texas back in the 82, working to protect the roost at Congress Avenue Bridge. So when they remodeled that bridge and made it wider, 6 lanes wide, they didn't realize it at the time, but they were building a terrific bat house. And back in the 80s, believe it or not, Austin was not weird enough to have millions of bats living under the bridge in downtown. So they were freaking out, literally. It made national news that all these bats were living under the bridge. Some people think the jogging craze got started with bats chasing people around Town Lake. I know Forrest Gump gets most of the credit for that but they were actually at a point of they were going to knock down the bridge and rebuild it so they wouldn't have bats in it. Our founder, Merlin Tuttle, heard about this. He was living in Milwaukee at the time, came down to Austin, and basically started having small talks like we're doing today about bats and how beneficial they are, and the fact that these bats have been living in Austin all along. They just weren't in one place because you built them a really nice bat house and they moved in. So they were able to convince the people, TxDOT and the city, just leave them alone. They're not bothering anybody. And they did. They left them alone. And annually right now, they're worth about $14 million in tax revenue for people that come to Austin to watch bat flights and visit the bats. So it's turned into ecotourism, not to mention they're great pest control and the hundreds of tons of bugs that they eat out every night at the cave. So that's how we got started. While Merlin was in Austin and everybody was so excited about 1 million bats, somebody mentioned, well, we don't, if you think 1 million bats are a lot, there's a whole bunch more down in San Antonio. You should check them out. So he went down and visited this cave with 20 million bats in it. We hadn't counted them at the time, but and he decided at that point that this roost really needed to be protected as well, especially being 20 miles from downtown San Antonio, right there in the I-35 corridor, which is 3rd to 5th fastest growing area in the country right now. So we started off with just 5 acres, the footprint of the cave, in 1992. And since then, we've been able to add acreage to that. So now we're up to 1,500 acres that we own outright and another 2,000 acres that's owned by the Nature Conservancy. And together, we manage that 3,500 acre piece as just one large preserve. Besides protecting the bat roost, it's aquifer protection for our recharge zone, and it's also habitat for our migratory golden-cheeked warbler, which is an endangered species of bird. So, and not to mention all the other wildlife that benefits in the Texas Hill Country from protecting that much acreage in such a industrial high growth area. So that's how we got started in Texas. Our headquarters is still in Austin. We're spread out all over the world. There's about 47 of us all over the world, and we spend all of our time protecting bats and their bat habitat and doing research to do that. So one of the projects, some of the other projects that we have going on besides Agave that we're going to get into today, we work with wind farms are a big threat to bats, killing hundreds of thousands of our migrating bats every year. White nose syndrome is a fungus that's killing our hibernating bats that we have in Texas as well. This has been spreading from north up in the New England area since 2007, and now it's into Texas and spreading west to California. So this fungus is a cold-loving fungus that grows in cold temperatures, mainly during the winter months in these caves that bats use to hibernate. So that's a big project we have going on as well. We also work in lots of other different countries protecting endangered species. We're in the process of purchasing 2 caves in Jamaica for another species of pollinating bat. There's only 225 of them left. They live in one cave in Jamaica, and then we're in the process of basically, hopefully, sometime in the next 60 days, we'll close on that land deal and be able to protect this cave. One of the biggest threats to that particular roost is guano mining. People using the guano in these caves for fertilizer, and the other biggest threat to for bats in that area are feral cats. So working with the local families and groups to protect that roost is really important. And we've got other projects in Tahiti, Rwanda, all over South Africa, all over the world to protect bats. But today we're going to talk about agave and bats, which is a big project we have going on here in the southwestern part of the United States and Mexico. So many of you guys are familiar with agave. There's over 200 different species of agave worldwide. And one of the unique things about agave is, depending on the species, can take anywhere from 12 to 18 years for that plant to mature to where it flowers. And that's when it's important to a lot of species of animals, both birds, butterflies, insects, bats, for the pollinators. So this, anytime we're talking about a landscape changes to an environment, protecting something where you're looking that far out for a particular species, in this case plants, that the benefit of planting those plants and protecting those plants is 15 to 18 years down the road. So this is a really long-term investment that Bat Conservation International has right now to protect these plants and protect our bats as well. So before we get right into this, one of the things we're going to do is get everybody on the same page about bats. So there's a lot of rumors out there about bats, but we have over 1,400 species worldwide. They're everywhere but the Antarctic. They're the only true flying mammal. So flying squirrels glide. They throw themselves out of a tree and hope there's a tree close enough that they can land on. But so the only true flying mammal. We have them in this particular area right now. There's 7 different species of bats that you have. Everything from spotted bat, Mexican free-tailed bats, to even our Mexican long-nosed bat, our pollinating bats. So they eat a lot of different things. Most people are familiar with, if you watch too much TV and all the horror movies, they're bloodsuckers. All right. Now, out of 1,400 species, only 3 species, blood is their food. They're all down in Central America. So we have no vampire bats in Texas or the United States. 2 of the 3 species is avian blood, so they prey on birds. So there's 1 species that mammals are their blood. And they get into a lot of trouble because of livestock. If any of you have been around livestock, especially cattle, they don't move around very much. A lot of times they really have no idea what's going on at the other end. And vampire bats will take advantage of that. So if you're a vampire bat and blood is your food, try to land on a white-tailed deer or a deer in that particular area to feed on it is a lot harder than a cow that's not going to move probably for a few hours. So when we get these livestock move into these areas where the bats are living, they'll take advantage of that readily available food source that's not going anywhere all night long. And so that's where we get the conflict between bats and people, because they'll prey on, and of course any ranchers, nobody wants anything messing with their livestock. So those are the problems we have with vampire bats. So that's only 3 species. So you can imagine how the other 1,300 species feel, because they're the ones that get all the press. They're getting the book deals, the movie deals, just those 3 species. That's what everybody knows about. But most of our bats are insectivores. They eat bugs. So, like for example, the Mexican free-tailed bats that we have at Bracken Cave, they eat over 150 tons of bugs a night. So that's an amazing amount of number of bugs. Scary thing is there's more than 150 tons of bugs out there every night. But they're doing their job bit to try to control how many bugs are out there. They're real important to our agricultural, for protection for our farmers and our ranchers, eating those agricultural pests and all those bugs. So those are the ones most people are familiar with. Some of the other things that bats eat are fruit bats are good, important for seed dispersal. Those are our larger bats. So size-wise, our smallest bat, the bumblebee bat, small enough to sleep on my thumb. Very tiny, has a 4-inch wingspan, lives in Taiwan, eats bugs. Our largest bat, the golden crown flying fox, you'll see those in Australia, parts of the tropics. They have a 6-foot wingspan. So think of a wiener dog with 6-foot wings, and this is a golden crown flying fox. It's a fruit bat. It will freak everybody out when it flies through the campsite, but it's there for fruit. So, but they look great on TV for the movies. So, in between we have our insect-eating bats, and also some of our bats are carnivorous. So they'll eat other smaller bats, smaller birds, frogs. We even have bats that fish. They have really long toenails that they can drag their toenails in the water and snatch up fish. Now, this is your typical fishing story. The fish is this big, not this big. So it's tiny minnow-sized fish that they're snatching up. And in this area, one of my favorite bats is a pallid bat. They're really scrappy. They like scorpions. They can hear a scorpion run across the ground from about 16 feet away. And they'll just fly over, jump on it. They don't care that the stinging doesn't bother them. And they just bite off the tail, bite off the pincers, and they have a nice juicy scorpion to eat. So they're real important for those of us that don't like scorpions in our house. And that's one we have in the area. But today we're going to talk about our pollinating bats. There's over 500 different plants all over the world that rely on bats for pollinating. These are basically the nighttime version of honeybees. Bananas, wild bananas are important for our store-bought bananas that are hybrids to keep them disease resistant. Coca, shea butter, those type of plants are mangoes. A lot of different plants are pollinated in the tropics by bats. And so that's why they're so important for those areas. A lot of those are exported, so they're really important to those local communities for food. And in some areas, bats are a food source, a source of protein. So we're going to talk a little bit more about our pollinating bats, our nectar-feeding bats. We have 3 species in the United States. So the Mexican long-nosed bat, the lesser long-nosed bat, and one that we have in this area as well, the Mexican long-tongued bat. Now the Mexican long-tongued bat, one of the crazy things is this, think of like a gerbil-sized bat with about a 15-inch wingspan. Their tongue is twice as long as their body, and it folds up in the back of their skull. So when it comes out, and I've got some video pictures. It's pretty amazing how long their tongue is, so they can get the nectar out of the plants. Now they have a pretty interesting migration pattern. So, and you can see in the image here, they come out of Mexico through this part of Texas into the Boot Hill and part of New Mexico, southern Arizona, Southern California, the Baja Peninsula, curve back around, and this is their annual cycle through this area. They're really important. The agave is real important to this migration. They only mate and breed in one cave in Mexico, and we're in the process of trying to protect that one cave that's left that these bats are mating in and breeding in, so we'll show you these pictures. So here's some video image. Bats are really good pollinators. If you look at this picture, the bat there on the left-hand side is typically a brown. This bat is brown colored, the fur, but you can see how yellow it is from all the pollen that's covering this bat. So going from flower to flower, and you can see in the video clip the bat getting the nectar out of one of these agave plants flowers. Now, one of the unique things about bats, and when they're young, in the left here you see a pregnant Mexican long-nosed bat, and then on the right the mother is carrying her baby. So for the first few weeks, the mother literally carries her baby when she's out foraging for food, and you can see how the baby here is almost as big as the mother. So So those of you that are moms out there, it's a lot more difficult than carrying one around on your hip. So, but they carry them around when they're out feeding. And they are mammals, so she's nursing that baby the whole time she's keeping it, carrying it. And then eventually they'll deposit them in a cave roost until they're about 5 or 6 weeks old. And at that point, the babies are old enough and strong enough they can fly on their own and follow the adults around. So we're going to talk about agave and the pollinating bats that need agave. So part of it is with our research program that we're working on, we're trying to identify, we know that the bats are using agave, and agave is important in the United States right now, actually all over the world, for tequila production. So one of the issues that has come up because of the popularity of tequila is we're losing our natural habitat to a monoculture, to where they're plowing over the natural habitat and just putting in agave. But they harvest the agave before it blooms, because that's when the agave is so full of sugar. So they harvest that root ball out to make the mezcal and tequila. So we're losing that natural habitat in these migratory corridors for the bats to feed on. So we're working with a number of different organizations to try to curb the impact of that loss of the natural habitat. So one of the things we're doing here in Texas and the southern part of the United States is we're trying to identify where the agave is and where the bats are, defining where this corridor is. And so you can see on the left-hand side, this is some of our natural habitat we have in the area. And one of the ways that we're using data is, have any of you all used iNaturalist? Because some of you are using iNaturalist. If you get a chance, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, it's a great app for those of you that are birders. You have your life lists for your birding apps. This is the non-birder version of a life list for plants and animals. So you can put it on your phone, and you can take a picture of a plant or bug or an animal, and it'll help you identify what that is, and it creates this life list of all your observations. But one of the key things is that data, when you take the picture, the GPS coordinates for where that bug is or where that plant is recorded in this international database. So scientists use that data to find plants and animals. So for example, last month, Bat Conservation International was contacted by National Geographic about this blue dragonfly that they want to do a documentary on. And so they need to come out and find the blue dragonfly nymphs in the water and take them back to the studio so they can film the life cycle of a blue dragonfly. I wasn't really paying attention. One of the things that we do at Bracken Cave Preserve is we do bioblitzes, and we use iNaturalist to record all that data. So we get a phone call from National Geographic, say, can we come out and collect some blue dragonfly nymphs from your pond? And sure, I didn't realize we had them out there because I'm paying more attention to bats. But so National Geographic used that data from iNaturalist to find places where they could collect these insects to put in a documentary that they were doing. So that's one of the benefits to iNaturalist. We are using that data that people collect. They go out and they take pictures of an agave, and it helps us to collect information about where agave is or where other plants are. So if you get a chance, put it on your phone, and when you're out for a hike, you can take pictures of plants and animals, create your own life list of observations. And for example, like if you're out visiting Bracken Cave Preserve and you take pictures of a tree or a plant, that goes into my preserve database, so I know what I've got on my preserve. So a lot of your parks and preserves have created boundary projects, so that data, that GPS data, spatial data is collected, and we use that data to see what's going on in our preserves. So if you get a chance, put it on your phone and collect all the data you can. Even when you're vacationing in another country, another state, another city, it's a lot of fun. It's great for kids. They've got a kid version as well, and also it's really nice to walk through an area and okay, that's other than it's a pretty green plant, you actually know that it's this type of species of plant helps improve that experience that you're out there with. So one of the ways that we're using new modern technologies to identify where all the agave is, besides our naturalists, is we use drones. So in this drone footage you see on the bottom right-hand corner, we can fly over a piece of property and we've got actually an algorithm and a software program that we can run the video through, and it helps us identify agave plants. So that which is I love it because it's easier for me to fly a drone over 1,000 acres. It's not as much fun to walk the 1,000 acres, but in the middle of the afternoon in the summer, it's a lot cooler. So we take advantage. We can cover more territory with the drone, and also with the new drones we have, we can set them up on a search pattern, so the drone will literally fly a grid, and we don't have to worry about when I'm flying it around, I drift a little too far right or lift a little too far left. So, but we use drones to identify agave plants, which also helps us. And then to figure out if bats are using those agave plants, one of the methods is we'll set up infrared cameras outside the agave in certain areas. And in the image here, you can see Mexican long-nosed bat flying up and getting nectar out of the agave plant. And one of the interesting things when watching them get up, they fly up and they just kind of like, it's like being on a swing when you're on a swing set. You kind of fly up, you get that few tenths of a second or where you're just hanging in air there, and then they drop off the plant. And that real quickly getting nectar out of the flower. And they do that all night long. So now one of the other new methods is eDNA. So it's an environmental DNA. So what we actually do is we will swab, in the video clip, we're swabbing the flowers. And then we'll take that DNA sample back to the lab, and we can run it, and we can tell all the different insects and animals that have come in contact with that flower overnight or during the day. So it's a great resource for us to cover a lot of territory in a short period of time and really get specific detail on what animals are using different species of plants. One of the things we found out with eDNA, and we kind of knew about it, but actually confirmed that pallid bats are great accidental pollinators. One of the things that pallid bats do, besides loving scorpions, they like crunchy beetles. They like crunchy stuff. So we'll get a lot of scarab beetles and stuff in some of our flowers, and they'll get up, the beetles will get up in the agave flowers, and the pallid bats are in there eating the beetles out of the agave flower and accidentally pollinating them as well. So we actually found pallid bat DNA in the flowers, as well as our Mexican longnose and long-tongued bats DNA in it. So that's another way of us finding out which bats are in which areas as well. So now that we know where the agave is, now we know where the bats are. One of our project is Bat Conservation International. In the next 10 years, we want to plant 1 million agave plants in the wild. So to do that, we need our native agave. So we're actually out collecting seed. So now that we've identified where the agaves are and the native agaves are in the area, so we're actually collecting seed out of these agaves. So this is one of the ways we're doing it. Get a bunch of people around with a tarp and shake the tree, bang the tree, and get those seeds out of the agave and take them back, clean them up. And then we've got nurseries that are actually growing the agave for us. A lot of these agaves, it's going to be 3 to 5 years before we can plant them in the ground. So we have nurseries growing. The closest one right now is up at Sol Ross. They've got some nurseries up there where they're growing agave for us, that's native to this area. And then when they're about 5 years old, we'll get out there and start putting them in the ground. So we don't right now. We're still growing stuff for Texas, but we've got a number of plantings going on. We're up around almost 100,000 plants that we've gotten in the ground in the last 3 years in the western part of the United States. So Arizona, parts of New Mexico, and also parts of Mexico. So, but we'll get out in the ground using local groups. We're actually even working with some of our Bureau of Land Management land, National Park Service land, and even with organizations that some of these mining companies will go into an area before it's mined and remove the native agaves to replant in other areas and spaces that are being reclaimed and put plants in those areas as well. So that's kind of the short version, edited version of what Bat Conservation International is doing for bats and agave in this area and this part of Texas and the United States. So there's some things that you guys can help us with. So one of the things we already talked about, iNaturalist, get out there and identify if you're out wall hiking around and you see agave, take a picture of it. Blooming agave is real important to us right now because that's the future for seed collection. So getting out there. Also, what we need access to where the agave is. As most of you know, 95% of Texas is privately owned. So we need access to those lands to get out and collect agave, to collect those DNA samples so we can confirm the exact corridors that these bats are using. If you happen to have caves on your land and they may or may not have bats in them, we can come in. My favorite part of my job is to go crawl in someone's cave and see if it has bats in it. It's a bonus if it has bats in it, just the fact that I get to crawl in someone's cave. Usually I run into a lot of pigs in some of these caves and rattlesnakes. I've got one ranch we're working on up in the Paladora area. We're at Rattlesnake Den 167 right now, but this is a 20,000 acre ranch, so we still got a lot of ground to cover. But yeah, so access to land to collect seeds is real important for us. So to get these seeds into the nurseries to get these plants growing. And one of the fun things everybody can help us with is, and some of us were working on it this weekend, is there actually is bat-friendly tequila out there. So if you go to the batfriendly.org website, we have a list of the bat-friendly tequilas. These are distilleries and agave farms that we're working with in Mexico that a portion of their farm is they let the agave mature. One of the things that agave is used for, it's like a natural fencing. So like fence rows and whatnot will be planted with agave and they'll allow it to mature and flower so the bats can continue to use those. At least 5% of their farm is allowed to mature and flower so bats have that food source. So that's one of the things that these bat-friendly tequilas work with to get that label put on their tequila. This is really good tequila. It's a nice, good sipping tequila. Also, too, some of you, if they put out hummingbird feeders, I know some of you in this area may have filled up your hummingbird feeder in the evening or afternoon, and then when you went out in the morning, it was empty. That's because of our pollinating bats. This is a video clip of some Mexican long-tongued bats drinking from someone's hummingbird feeder. And it's probably hard to see from a distance, but you can literally see one of the tongue going down into the hummingbird feeder to get the sugar water out. So putting a hummingbird feeder, making sure they're full at night. It's kind of like double duty. You're going to have to fill them back up again in the morning. But the hummingbirds and bats will take advantage of those hummingbird feeders. and to get extra food. And and it's also pretty cool to sit out there and watch these guys feeding off of your hummingbird feeder. And they just kind of like hang there. Some of them cheat and climb on top of it, which is fine. But they just, and if you get lucky enough, these are all pregnant in this video clip, but you actually might even get a chance to see one with carrying the baby on her chest, which is pretty amazing. See, because the babies are bright pink when they're carrying them. So, but one of the other BCI staff members, Dr. Kristen Lear, that works with our endangered species project, and she's heading our Agave program. So this is her contact information as well as mine. So between the two of us, you can contact us if you've got information, like if you're seeing bats around your hummingbird feeder. We'd love to know. We can document where that is, so we have an idea where these bats are moving to an area, when they're moving to an area. So any kind, or if you have agave on your land, and you're willing to let us come out and harvest seed from it, let me know. We'd love to get the more seed we have, makes the more diversity we have with our plants. Is always beneficial. So, and if you have any questions, now's your chance for whatever bat questions you've had me keeping you up at night. Now's your chance.